Hello and welcome to your Chromatic training. I am super excited to be sharing this pre-training experience with you, and I have so much that I want to get done. But ultimately, let's talk a little bit about how Chromatic yoga is going to enhance your teaching and, of course, enhance your students' practice. Because you're here as a yoga teacher, assuming the goal for you is to become the best yoga teacher you can be. And to do that, you're aware that you have to refine your skill sets, grow and transform as a teacher. Now, of course, that means transforming your physical yoga practice and getting better in that respect. But ultimately, there's a big difference between skills of, let's say, practice and skills of teaching. And what chromatic yoga is aiming to do is provide you with the teaching skill sets so that you can better transmit what you already know in your body and in your, say, philosophical practice of yoga to your students. So chromatic level 1 is all about the physical side of the practice, whereas the heart, which is more like chromatic level 2, is going to help you with the philosophy. However, the cool thing is both of these trainings really amplify the same structure, and the structure that underlies a great teaching experience, or from a student's perspective, a great learning experience. The structure is ultimately what enables me as a student to learn faster, and it enables you as a teacher to teach more effectively, so your students are then learning faster. Okay, so what we're doing predominantly in chromatic yoga is, as teachers, developing better skills so that we can provide a more profound, transformative experience for our students. And we do that first with understanding the structure of a yoga class. And when I say structure of a yoga class, there are basics, right? We have basic structure, meaning if we were doing an hour-long class, well, we all know at this point, if you're already a certified yoga teacher, you've got an opening. Maybe that's a hello, welcome. Maybe it's Dharma talk for you. So we have an introduction, more or less. Then from the introduction of hi, saying hello, and maybe giving a Dharma talk, then we have the grounding or centering, right? And then we have warm up postures, typically cat cows, things like this, maybe a down dog, perhaps a chaturanga here and there. Then we have sun salutations, standing postures, preparatory poses for a peak posture, then a cool down, and then hopefully shavasana and a closing, right? So that's the basic structure of a yoga class. And how, what's interesting about that is we all use pretty much the same structure across the majority of vinyasa, hatha, physical yoga practices. Typically use the same structure. Even styles like Baptiste yoga or Anusara yoga, these styles that have very kind of more rigid structures, are following the same underlying structure, right? So even if you've memorized a sequence, typically that sequence has a structure that you might not be aware of. But what we do in chromatic yoga is bring light and awareness to that structure so that you, as the teacher, can utilize it and then get creative. We're all about, in chromatic yoga, amplifying your creativity. But at first, before you can get creative, you have to understand the basic foundations and structures that underlie the creativity. What I equate this to is like an artist looking to express themselves with paint on a page. It's great if you want to paint something beautiful, but if you don't have the skills to do so, it's very difficult to get anything out on the canvas. So if you learn the skills of mixing paint and color palettes and understanding different brush techniques, then you are able to take the desire to create and your creativity and make something beautiful out of it. Same is true with, like, say, music. It's great if you have a desire to share, but if you don't have the skills, let's say if you want to play guitar and you want to share some sort of creativity there, you'd have to be able to put your fingers on the strings in order to make sounds that would then be called guitar music, right? So all creative endeavors require structure and technique. Once you have the structure and technique, you can create within those structures and techniques so freely and beautifully. And what's interesting about the yoga practice that I have observed and why I felt the need to create chromatic yoga is that those structures are rarely ever taught. So it's rare that you learn the underlying workings of something, and therefore your creativity is stifled because you're just stuck memorizing what someone else said to teach. And while memorization is a really key piece of the puzzle when learning something, and it's really important to memorize something that somebody else taught, it is not the end. It's just a starting point. It's where I think when you're doing a 200-hour training, it's great. You should memorize a sequence or memorize, some sequences that your teacher taught and teach those until you get confident speaking and using your tone of voice and being in front of people and all the other things, ending on time, starting on time, and all of the other stuff that goes into teaching yoga, building your confidence, just being in front of people. You can have a memorized sequence, but if you only have one memorized sequence, you're going to get bored really fast. Your creativity is not going to be exercised. And therefore, the piece of the puzzle of self-expression, which is one of the reasons why we as teachers are called to teach, is to express ourselves. And we as students are called to certain teachers' expressions, meaning if you have a teacher that you really appreciate, you're appreciating the way that they express themselves and the yoga practice through their vessel, their body, their mind, the way that they see things, their perspective. That perspective is what you're attracted to and what you want to gain. That doesn't mean you want to be just like them and all that other stuff, but there is something about the way that they express themselves that attracts us, right? And what we want to do is refine the structure, refine the techniques, and to ultimately free ourselves to authentically teach. Which leads us to the last conversation here within this opening video. Chromatic yoga is definitely on the side of, we know, creativity, but also authenticity. And the challenge with authenticity when in a learning environment is that you will feel completely inauthentic when you are learning something that you have not mastered and that is not familiar. So when approaching the preliminary aspects of becoming a chromatic yoga teacher, or some of you that are watching this video are already chromatic teachers looking to amplify your skill sets and continue your education. But if you're on the newer side to this information, you haven't yet learned what I'm about to share with you, and you haven't practiced these things, you'll feel inauthentic. The reality is it's not inauthentic yet. What it is unfamiliar, uncharted territories. It is clumsy. It feels like learning, and learning as an adult can feel stressful. It could feel effortful. And those things we don't usually equate with authenticity. Usually we think about authenticity as feeling comfortable who we are. But authenticity is not who we were or who we are now. It's also those things, but who we are becoming. Because if authenticity didn't include our future self, then we would have stopped being authentic at age 1, right? When we barely learned anything, we just started taking in information. But authenticity grows as we grow, right? So what feels authentic to us is what's comfortable, but that's not the end. Authenticity is always growing, but in the phase of learning, it doesn't feel authentic. And so that's what I want to just kind of make sure you understand. Going into any kind of training for that matter may not feel authentic, but when, especially a training that's refining the way you use your words, the way that you share something, meaning the yoga practice in this case, the way that you share the yoga practice, it's not going to feel authentic unless you have already been sharing the yoga practice in this way. So while we want to get to a place where it is really authentically you, just know that there's going to be a departure from the feeling of comfort and the feeling of, this is totally you. It's going to feel out of that zone for a while until it becomes a skill set that you have mastered. Once you've mastered the skill sets that I'm going to provide for you in these trainings, then you'll be able to pick out what is authentic for you specifically and what is your creative expression within these structures. So we first learn the structures, and then once the structures are there, just like a musician first learns scales and chords, then once they learn the scales and chords, then they can freely use them to create music that is authentically in their soul. We want to do the same as teachers, just like artists and musicians or chefs, any kind of creative endeavor. We want to learn the skills, the techniques, and then within that we can create beauty. And so that's our goal here with chromatic yoga. And that really talks about the word chromatic coming from both music and art, trying to amplify that understanding that there's structure and there's creativity. If we learn the structure, we can then flourish with our creativity. Otherwise, if we don't learn the structure and we just memorize someone else's creativity, we will eventually feel like we don't have any expression within it. We might feel confident, but we'll get started getting bored. And then if we're bored, our students get bored, and so on and so forth. And then our passion is not coming through, and therefore the students' desire to learn from us is going lower and lower. So let's get into it. We'll get into some the basic structures that you need to know. Predominantly what we're going to do in this training is you're going to observe me teaching, and you're going to pick out some of those structures and observe how I do it. How do I do a warm up? How do I do sun salutations? How do I do what we call in chromatic yoga a physical through line? And then once you can observe it and you can pick it out when I'm doing it, we can then help you become a chromatic teacher utilizing these structures. And just know this, as you're going through it, learning or picking out what I'm doing doesn't mean you have to do it the same way. I don't care if you teach a warm up the same way that I do, or a sun salutation the same way that I do, or a standing pose or whatever. But I do care that you have the skills to offer it in a really profound way that makes the best opportunity for your students to learn and transform their practice. All right, let's get into it. I'll see you on the next video.